Hi, today we will explain the storyline of the film called Cast Away, which was released back in 2000. So sit back and let's start the story. At the beginning of the film it showed a FedEx car delivering packages to several houses. Elsewhere, a FedEx boss named Chuck looked angry and asked all his employees to work more optimally than before. After that, several people were seen moving several packages into the car. At the same time, an employee told Chuck that there was an expedition car stuck in the snow. They had to go there and move all the packages in the car. In the evening, Chuck and others made their way to deliver the package by plane. When he got there, Chuck immediately met his girlfriend named Kelly, who was a lecturer. They also had dinner with their friends and family. At that time, one of their family members discussed marriage. After that, they left from there. Because Christmas and the New Year was coming, the delivery of the expedition was very busy and required Chuck to go to Malaysia. He promised to return before the New Year arrived. Before Chuck left, Kelly had given him a gift of a watch containing her photo. The watch was one of Kelly's valuables because the watch was a legacy from her grandfather, and her grandfather used the watch while he was in the South Pacific. Long story short, they went on a trip to Malaysia. While on the plane, Chuck saw a photo of his girlfriend. A moment later, he went to the toilet. But suddenly there was an explosion. The pilot told Chuck to sit and put on the seatbelt. Chuck returned to his seat, but he realized that the watch Kelly gave him fell and he took off his seatbelt and took the watch. The plane was now out of control and they had to make an emergency landing, but unfortunately they were right above the ocean, so they had no other choice. They had to land in the ocean. Chuck, who was still conscious, tried his best to get out of the plane. After that, Chuck tried to get away from the plane and an explosion occurred which destroyed the rubber boat. He also found another floating inflatable boat and boarded it. The next day, Chuck was stranded on an island. He immediately got off the rubber boat and checked his pocket, and found the watch given by Kelly was still there. Chuck screamed and looked around, but he found no sign of life on the island. Chuck dragged the rubber boat onto the mainland. After that, he wrote the word help. He hoped that someone would see the writing and come to help him. But until the sun went down, he did not see anyone there. At night, Chuck slept on the rubber boat, but he felt as if someone was watching him and he couldn't fall asleep. The next day, Chuck replaced the help writing by using some coconut trees. Then he collected all the stranded packages with him. After that, Chuck saw a falling coconut. Finally, he had the idea to collect some coconuts. He tried to open the coconuts. The first attempt failed because he did not have adequate tools, but on the second try, finally Chuck could open the coconut and drink the water. In addition to feeling thirsty, Chuck, who felt hungry, finally looked for fish with makeshift equipment. While looking for fish, Chuck saw a rock that formed a cave. He tried to scream, but no one answered Chuck. After that, Chuck returned to look for fish, but he did not manage to catch a single fish and instead injured his leg when he stepped on the coral reefs. He also saw the hill near the beach. Chuck bandaged his leg with torn pants and tried to climb the hill to see the surroundings. Arriving at the top, Chuck saw one of the pilots of the plane floating in the ocean. Finally, Chuck immediately got down and tried to help the person. When he turned his body, it turned out that the person had died. Chuck also brought the victim's body to the mainland. Chuck checked if there was anything that could be used. Chuck found a flashlight in the pilot's boots. After that, he buried the pilot's body and put on his shoes. After a few days on the uninhabited island, Chuck began to get frustrated. Until one night he saw a ship near the island. Chuck tried to turn on the flashlight and make an SOS signal, but the ship did not see it. The next day, Chuck decided to go to the ship using his rubber boat, but unfortunately the waves were too big and hit the boat, causing Chuck to crash, and his leg was injured because it was hit by a rock. By enduring the pain, Chuck tried to return to the mainland. When he got there, he bandaged the wound using his clothes. At night, there was a rainstorm that caused the water to rise to the beach. Chuck decided to sleep in the cave to avoid the water. The next day, after he woke up, Chuck opened all the packages he found. The contents of the package were a volleyball, ice skating shoes, and a women's dress. When he wanted to open the last package, Chuck undid his intention after seeing the address of the recipient of the package. Chuck used these things to survive. He used iron from the shoes to open coconuts, and clothes were made of nets to catch fish. He also made a spear to catch crabs. After that, Chuck started thinking about starting a bonfire. He tried to light a fire using wood, but after trying all day he didn't succeed and instead made his hands cramp and hurt. Chuck, who was annoyed, vented his frustration on the volleyball. Chuck took the volleyball. There were traces of Chuck's bloody hand there. Chuck drew eyes, nose, and mouth on the surface of the volleyball and considered them a friend. After that, Chuck wanted to try to light a fire a second time, and he succeeded. At night, Chuck ate his homemade grilled crab while talking to the volleyball, and he named the volleyball Wilson. The next night, Chuck felt a toothache. Because he could not stand it, Chuck intended to pull his teeth using ice skating shoes, and when Chuck did so, he was in pain and made him unconscious. 4 years had passed. Chuck now ate raw fish every day that he caught himself. Then he spends the night looking at the cave walls and looking at pictures of Kelly with the help of moonlight and lightning. Wilson was the only person he'd talked to for the past 4 years. The next day, when Chuck was catching fish, he found the wreck of the plane and tried to set it up on the beach. When it fell, Chuck finally had an idea, which was to build a boat and leave the place. The first thing he did was collect some wood, then made ropes from the bark. After that, he tried to assemble the wood. When he was assembling, it turned out that he had run out of ropes because he had used all the trees. Finally, he climbed up the hill to get the rope he had wanted to use to commit suicide. In the evening, Chuck talked to Wilson again, and he felt Wilson was talking too much, so he got annoyed and threw the ball down. Not long after that, Chuck regretted his actions and immediately looked for Wilson. Fortunately, Wilson could still be found. Wilson! Then he cut his hand to make Wilson's face clearer. After a few days, finally Chuck's decision to leave the island became stronger. Before he left, he wrote about himself on a stone. After that, Chuck lowered the boat. Chuck used the wreck of the plane as a sail as well as the roof of the boat, and his journey began.
You don't have to worry about anything.
After rowing for a few minutes, Chuck finally came face to face with the waves, but this time Chuck was finally able to pass the waves. After making it through the waves, Chuck looked moved, finally able to be free from the island he had occupied for 4 years. In the middle of the ocean, Chuck looked tossed about, following the cardinal directions. At that time, Chuck also had time to meet a whale, but he tried to remain calm and the fish did not bother him. In the middle of the ocean, Chuck also faced a storm that made the sails of the ship fly with the wind. It didn't just stop there. Chuck also had to lose Wilson, who had been accompanying him. Chuck tried to take Wilson back, but unfortunately he failed. After days tossing about in the ocean, there was a large ship right beside him. Chuck waved his hand at the ship while mentioning Kelly's name. In a different place, Kelly was seen receiving a call, but she immediately fainted when she received the phone call. Long story short, Chuck finally managed to survive, and he was now on a plane headed to a place. It turned out that they were going back to the FedEx office, where there were already many people welcoming him. Arriving at the FedEx office, Chuck met a man who was none other than Kelly's husband. The man said that at this time Kelly was having a difficult time and could not meet him. After that, the man left there carrying Kelly. At night, Chuck, who still couldn't let Kelly go, slept like when he was firstly in the cave. He used the moonlight to see the photo of his lover. Because he could not contain his longing, finally Chuck went to Kelly's house using a taxi. Chuck was already in front of Kelly's house and looked doubtful. When Chuck is about to ring the doorbell of Kelly, Kelly opened the door and immediately hugged Chuck. Kelly invited Chuck to come into her house and gave a towel for Chuck to dry himself, while Kelly made a coffee for him. They both looked awkward because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Then Chuck said he meant to come to return the watch that Kelly had given him. Then Kelly took Chuck to the garage and showed them their car first. Kelly gave the car keys to Chuck, and Chuck went to use the car. When Chuck started to leave, Kelly immediately called and chased Chuck. Chuck, who had not gone far, immediately returned and they hugged each other. All this time Kelly was sure that Chuck was still alive, but everyone asked her to stop saying that and had to let it go, even though Kelly was already married to someone else, but for her Chuck was her true love. After that, Kelly brought Chuck back to her house. There Chuck talked with Kelly's husband. He told how he survived on the island. He had wanted to commit suicide by using a rope that was hung from a log, but the wood broke so that Chuck could not die the way he wanted. Since then, he felt he had to stay alive no matter what. After that, Chuck went to deliver a package that he didn't open to a house. Since the owner of the house wasn't around, Chuck wrote a letter to thank him for the package that actually saved his life.